Whether it be a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, or space, the final frontier. Or, if you go on YouTube, you can find many sci-fi stories about aliens and humans, war, members of galactic councils, etc. These stories include massive starships, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, all with FTL engines, which is faster than light travel, and massive kinetic weapons, missile tubes, gun emplacements, some strong enough to even crack planets. Though most of these topics are sci-fi, science fiction, almost all have a certain weapon that is based in reality and in use today. These are what is known as railguns, a weapon that uses electromagnetic force to launch high-velocity projectiles that usually don't contain explosives. Instead, they rely on the projectile's kinetic energy to deliver damage to the target. The premise of a railgun uses a parallel rail-shaped conductors that holds an armature, the projectile. The electromagnetic current flows down one rail, then up the other, producing the energy to accelerate the projectile towards the target. Railguns can produce a muzzle velocity of 3 kilometers per second or 8.8 Mach, a substantial increase over explosive propellant projectiles, which can't readily produce muzzle velocity over 2 kilometers per second or Mach 5.9. Furthermore, the range also exceeds that of conventional weapons, and its destructive force, which depends upon its kinetic energy, its mass, and square of its velocity. The higher velocity of the railguns also increases the destructive force. It creates exponentially. The lower cost of the projectiles, plus the absence of explosives and gunpowder, are also key advantages of railguns. Railguns are still in the research stage. The practicality of a railgun use will be dependent on its energy demand, complexity of its pulse-powered electromagnetic launch systems. The railgun differs from a conventional electric motor setup due to its has no field windings. Its basis involves a single loop of current, a very high current, around 1 million amps of current to be precise, to provide the energy to provide the right acceleration and muzzle velocity. An augmented railgun uses additional rail setups to reduce the current needed to accelerate a given projectile. Augmented railguns are considered series wound configurations. Additionally, some railguns use strong neodymium magnets with a field perpendicular to the current's flow to increase the force of the projectile. The theory behind a railgun is a simple mix of electrical theory, physics, mathematics, and the additional study of different sciences. If you find these combinations simple, that is, 2 parallel metal rails connected to a power supply on one end, which is the breech end, a conductive projectile is placed on the rails, essentially completing the electrical circuit. Through the electrons flow up the negative rail, across the projectile, and down the positive rail, completing the circuit. This action turns the rails into an electromagnet, basically, creating a magnetic field between the rails up to the projectile. And following the right angle rule, the magnetic field around each rail conductor are in opposite direction. Thus, the magnetic field between the rails is directed at right angles. Add in the current, and this combination produces a Lorentz force, which accelerates the projectile down the rails, away from the power supply, towards the muzzle end of the rail. The force of the projectile is proportional to the square of the current's magnitude and inversely proportional to the distance between the rails or conductors. Thus, a projectile of a few kilograms and rails only a few meters long will need very large currents to reach velocity of 1,000 meters per second or greater. A massive power supply of 1 million amps, thus creating tremendous force to launch the projectile many meters per second, will also put great strain on the rails, recurring frequent replacement of the rails due to the erosion by the massive currents and magnetic fields. There are heat-resistant materials that could help protect the rails, prolonging their life, but the general consensus is a major breakthrough in material science and related disciplines are needed to produce high-powered railguns capable of firing more than a few shots from a pair of rails. Well beyond our current science, the rails would need to withstand several rounds per minute for thousands of shots before significant degradation. Now, as of 2010, the largest known power that could power a railgun and launch a projectile was 33 megajoules. Early railgun tests were limited to one shot due to the damage sustained to the rails. The Navy is leading the way in different railgun configurations and shapes to determine what is feasible. Full-scale models have been built and tested, including a 90mm bore, a 9 megajoule kinetic energy gun developed by US DARPA. Military applications are of great interest due to the replacement of explosive rounds. This doing away with potential hazards aboard any vehicle that has the railgun. Also, increased muzzle velocities using aerodynamically streamlined projectiles benefit from lower ranges and increased velocities within. The military is aiming for muzzle velocities in the range of 4,500 to 7,800 miles per hour and muzzle energies of 5 to 50 megajoules. For these that don't know, 50 megajoules of energy is equivalent to a 5 metric ton school bus traveling at 316 miles per hour or 141 meters per second. Single loop rail guns would need a million amps, and most rails are air-cored. Ferromagnetic materials like iron are not used. Railgun velocities are achievable by two-stage light gas guns. The combustion light gas gun is a 155 millimeter prototype thought to achieve 2,500 meters per second with a 70 caliber barrel. In theory, railguns power supply technology can supply a compact, safe, reliable, combat survivable, lightweight units due to the total system volume and mass needed to accommodate such power supply, and its fuel is less than the volume and mass of mission equivalent explosive ammo. It's argued such tech has been introduced due to the electromagnetic aircraft launch system, the EMALS, although railguns require much higher power systems because energy needed to be delivered in milliseconds instead of regular seconds. This would replace dangerous explosive weapons which could be vulnerable to enemy fire. The railgun's conception was by French inventor, I hope I don't butcher this, André Louis Octave Faucon Villeplay, who created a small working model in, get this now, 1917. And he was helped by the Société Anonyme des Accumulateurs Tudor, which is now Tudor Batteries. Villeplay was commissioned to build a larger model, but the end of World War I saw the project abandoned. In 1923, we saw Russian scientist Al Korolkov criticize Villeplay's design, but decided such a weapon was in the realm of possibility, but hindered by the gun's need of enormous power to use it. Joachim Hansler of Germany proposed the first theoretically viable railgun design in 1944 during World War II in Germany. The Luftwaffe's specs demanded a muzzle velocity of 4,500 miles per hour or 6,600 feet per second and an explosive projectile weighing 1.1 pounds. The guns were to be a six-pack firing system firing 12 rounds a minute. A study was done, and by 1947, it was a feasible design, but the power requirement for each gun could illuminate half of Chicago. A massive, massive power supply. Now, Sir Mark Oliphant, an Australian physicist, started the design and construction of the world's largest homopolar generator, a 500 megajoule power supply, which was used to power a railgun experiment. Later, the Ballistic Research Lab, or the U.S. Army Research Lab, began a very long program of research of viable railgun in 1980. By 1984, the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization goals had shifted into research to the establishment of a constellation of satellites to intercept intercontinental ballistic missiles. These small projectiles were researched, ones which could withstand high G launch from ultra-high velocity plasma railguns. By 1985, the U.S. Army and Marine Corps and DARPA were assigned to develop anti-armor electromagnetic launch systems for mobile ground combat vehicles. Since 1993, the U.S. and British have collaborated on a railgun project at the Dungannon Weapons Testing Center that produced in 2010 a test where BAE Systems fired a 7-pound projectile at 18.4 megajoules at 7,600 miles per hour or 11,100 feet per second. Also in 2010, the U.S. Navy tested a compact system to be used for ship emplacement, firing a 7-pound projectile also at Mach 10 or 11,100 feet per second, using also 18.4 megajoules of energy. It actually was the first such test in history, beating the other. The project's motto, Velocitas Erradico, was Latin for I who am speed eradicate, or in layman's terms, speed kills. As of 2014, the only ships in the U.S. Navy which could produce enough power to energize a railgun were the 3 Zumwalt class destroyers, which could generate 78 megawatts of power, enough to energize a railgun. But the cancellation of the Zumwalt class has made engineers try to integrate the systems designed for the Zumwalts to be integrated into other class ships so that the railguns could be used on these such ships, say like the Alibert class destroyer. The Navy is also developing directed energy weapons for air defense, but they are far from being effectively integrated also. The most promising use of railguns is with the Navy, whose ships have space to house electrically generating capacity and also space to house items such as batteries to store such energy to fire railguns. Ground forces will find it much harder to incorporate such systems in a readily mobile platform. The future development may remedy such issues though. The major obstacles hindering the railgun's development are durability. The erosion of the rails due to the high current and shots imploding such rails is one reason that the railguns are not in use. They have to be sturdily mounted and also have to be made of a material that can withstand more than a few shots. Also, projectile guidance, which is the issue of the railgun hitting its target such as missiles or a distant target. But the Navy is developing a package just for this issue. So the railgun is far more than just the main weapon on a starship that are at the central topic of many sci-fi stories. Railguns have been tested and are in the process of being refined to fit on our Navy vessels far before they are designed for space battle. The future is now, and certain advancements will see the railgun replace many explosive weapons in our militaries, which will be a safe and effective replacement. I'm Big Duke 6 for CoolKegs Productions. Please like, subscribe, hit the noti bell, and thank you for listening, my friends.